Good afternoon. My name is Joe Atkinson, and I'll be the host for today's briefing on NASA's Tropospheric Emissions Monitoring of Pollution, or TEMPO, an air quality satellite instrument. According to our friends at the Space Force's 45th Weather Squadron, conditions are currently looking favorable for launch from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket no earlier than 12:29 a.m. Friday, April 7th. That launch window is 2 hours, and TEMPO is a hosted payload on Intelsat 40E. We have a great panel today that includes Karen St. Germain, Earth Science Division Director at NASA headquarters, Kevin Doherty, TEMPO Project Manager at NASA's Langley Research Center, Zhang Liu, TEMPO Deputy Principal Investigator at the Center for Astrophysics, Harvard and Smithsonian, Dennis Nix, Director of Payload Engineering at Ball Aerospace, Aaron Abel, TEMPO Project Manager at Maxar, and Jean-Luc Froliger, Senior Vice President of Space Systems at Intelsat. We'll hear a little from each of our panelists, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Karen, it's all yours.
Great, thanks so much, and it's terrific to be with you all today. So again, I'm Karen St. Germain, the Director of Earth Science for NASA, and I'm going to talk to you just for a few minutes on how TEMPO fits into the broader Earth Science portfolio and strategy. So TEMPO was our first funded Earth Venture instrument in our Earth Venture program, and it's a prime example of how NASA is implementing our Earth Action strategy. This always starts with developing innovative technologies that enable more, better, different Earth observations. And those observations lead us to a better understanding of how the Earth works as a system. That understanding allows us to improve our predictive models. And those models generally bring in data from a variety of different observing platforms. Those better models allow us to develop more applications of the data, more predictive tools, and put that information, that actionable information, into the hands of decision makers at every level, on the timelines they need it and how they need it. So we call this the value chain of Earth observation, from new technology to observations to understanding to models to applications. So that's the Earth Action strategy. And TEMPO's Earth Science understanding and the mission's near real-time air quality measurements fit right in here. They'll benefit the operational framework of other agencies. For example, NOAA and EPA are two really important partners and early adopters of TEMPO data and applications. NASA has over 50 years of Earth science and climate data. And as more federal agencies incorporate climate resilience, adaptation, and response into their missions, NASA's Earth Science is powering their programs. And it's not just NOAA and EPA, but also agencies like the Department of Agriculture, FEMA, Interior, and more. To make data open and accessible to the broader public, NASA is also developing our Earth Information Center. It'll be both a physical and online hub of Earth and climate information. So coming back to TEMPO, TEMPO's observations will feed directly into the Earth Observation Center. And government agencies that already look to NASA for Earth science for help with their operational services will be able to add TEMPO data in to improve air quality modeling, public health alerts. One of 4 Earth science launches this calendar year. And then looking even further ahead, by the turn of the decade, we intend to launch the Earth System Observatory, which is an array of Earth-observing satellite missions with instruments and understanding that builds on the missions we have flying today, including TEMPO. So TEMPO is joining the Earth Science family and advancing our ability to see the Earth system at higher fidelity, both in time and in space, and in terms of what different elements of the Earth system we can observe. So with that, back to you.
Thank you, Karen, and we'll have Kevin Doherty, the TEMPO Project Manager from NASA Langley, up next.
All right, thanks, Joe. As Joe mentioned, I'm Kevin Doherty. I'm the project manager of NASA's TEMPO mission, which is, as a reminder, is the Tropospheric Emissions Monitoring of Pollution mission. From a geostationary vantage point where the satellite orbit matches the rotation of the Earth, which allows it to stay above the same location on Earth at all times, TEMPO will be measuring pollutions and air quality across the greater North America on an hourly basis during the daytime, all the way from Puerto Rico up to the tar sands of Canada. TEMPO is one of 3 instruments that will be on orbit at the same time to cover the majority of the northern hemisphere. And one of those instruments is already launched by South Korea, and another one is on the way with our partners over at the European Space Agency. The TEMPO instrument, one of the things that makes us unique is that we are developed as a hosted payload, which is a relatively new business model that NASA is using to enable placing instruments like TEMPO into an orbit at greatly reduced cost when compared to building and launching our own satellite. So TEMPO will be riding on a geostationary communication satellite, looking at the same region of Earth every day, the greater North America, rather than getting a once-a-day look, often at the same time of day, in low Earth orbit yet. So TEMPO is made possible by the funding from NASA, and we rely heavily on our partnerships with a variety of organizations. Some of the key ones that we have are the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, or the Center for Astrophysics, Harvard and Smithsonian. And that's really the science powerhouse of the mission, and they're responsible not only for the data processing, but determining what TEMPO will be measuring or doing on a daily basis, what part of North America we will be looking at. So Ball Aerospace is another one of our partners. They designed and built the instrument. Then we brought on board Maxar Technologies, who built the host spacecraft that they were already building for Intelsat, but integrated TEMPO into the design and tested TEMPO on the spacecraft. And lastly, we have Intelsat, who is the owner-operator of the spacecraft, and they'll be responsible for passing the data from TEMPO down to the Smithsonian, as well as sending the command loads up that tell TEMPO what to do on a weekly basis. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Joe.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. Next up, we have Zhang Liu, TEMPO Deputy Principal Investigator from the Center for Astrophysics, Harvard and Smithsonian.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So my name is Zhang Liu, TEMPO's Deputy PI. So I'm going to briefly talk about TEMPO science. It's about time. Yeah, this is our TEMPO motto. The time here means hourly. Unlike existing low Earth orbit LEO satellite instruments that can only measure atmospheric pollution once per day at a fixed time, and TEMPO from the GEO will for the first time provide hourly daytime air pollution at the near neighborhood scale of 4 square miles, providing the most extensive view of air pollution over North America. It's also about time, soon after launch, for us to get started to answer the TEMPO science questions when we propose TEMPO. The TEMPO observation will dramatically improve our scientific data record of air pollution over North America. It will help understand how physical, chemical, and dynamic processes determine air quality over scales ranging from urban to continental and from throughout the day to seasonally. It will also help understand how intercontinental transport affects air quality, along with the northern hemispheric air quality constellation. It will help understand how episodic events such as wildfires, dust outbreaks, and volcanic eruptions affect air quality. TEMPO is a science mission, but our TEMPO Early Adopters Program, funded by NASA Applied Sciences, has been established and worked closely with us to broaden and enhance TEMPO applications with special attention to public health and air quality. The more than 300 early adopters, including federal like EPA and LOA, and state and local air quality agencies, health organizations, non-profit organizations, scientific researchers, and international partners have been trained with synthetic tempo data, and they are waiting to learn how to use tempo data for societal benefit, and like use tempo data in the air quality forecasting system to alert the public about air pollution. Tempo will pave the way for the next generation of operational air quality satellites. Yeah, that's it. Get back to you, Joe.
Thank you, John. Next, we have Dennis Nix, Director of Payload Engineering at Ball Aerospace.
Thanks, Joe. This is Dennis. I'd like to express my thanks to all of the partners involved in the TEMPO mission. These types of things are truly collaborative efforts, and that's what enabled us to be here today. Ball Aerospace has been providing UV-vis spectrometers for measuring atmospheric composition from space for over 40 years. The Solar Backscatter UV2 instrument, or SBUV2, on NOAA's Polar Orbiting Environmental Satellite and the Ozone Mapping Profiler Suite, or OMPS, on the NOAA Joint Polar Satellite Systems, were specifically designed to measure stratospheric ozone. The TEMPO instrument represents the next generation of this capability for measuring atmospheric composition, and in particular, air pollution. The TEMPO instrument is about the size of your washing machine at home. It measures the sun that's reflected off the Earth's atmosphere and separates it into about 2,000 component wavelengths. The scientists at SAO then use these hyperspectral data to determine the concentrations of the trace gases in the atmosphere. The TEMPO instrument will join its sister instrument, the Geostationary Environment Monitoring Spectrometer, or GEMS, which was launched a little over 3 years ago. The GEMS instrument, also built by Ball, was developed for Korea's National Environmental Research Institute. The data that GEMS collects over Korea and the greater Asian continent gives us an idea as to how the TEMPO data will look over greater North America. We're very excited for this new capability for the United States and our neighbors to the north and the south. Back to you, Joe.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Next, we have Aaron Abel, TEMPO Project Manager at Maxar.
Yes, thank you, Joe. It is really exciting to be at this point in the program. Upcoming TEMPO launch really is a journey a decade in the making. When contracted in 2019, Maxar was asked to apply its extensive experience with hosted payloads, Earth observation weather satellites, as well as leverage the highly reliable and flexible 1300 platform to accommodate the science instrument in parallel with the commercial payload. Known as a hosted payload, the TEMPO program really is a win-win-win for the major entities involved. It allows unused capacity on Maxar's heritage satellite design to be leveraged for government missions. This reduces the cost of access to space for the government, as well as reduces the cost for Intelsat as they are compensated for their support of the TEMPO mission. As I mentioned, this was a journey. If we go back to the early 2010s, prior to the instrument completion, Maxar did give feedback to technical specifications when NASA reached out to the industry as a whole for inputs into how to accommodate the TEMPO instrument onto various host spacecraft. Eventually, when Maxar was awarded the contract to integrate the instrument, this was done ahead of identifying the specific host spacecraft. With this hosted payload award in hand, Maxar and Intelsat were able to identify IS-40 as an ideal candidate and then work together to make this contract a reality. Now, diving down a bit, specifically, Maxar was contracted to integrate the TEMPO payload onto a commercial satellite, as well as provide ground operations to deliver mission data to the Instrument Command Center. Worded a little differently, Maxar was tasked with putting the instrument in a position on orbit where it could gather data, and then again with Intelsat's essential partnership, Maxar accepted responsibility for coordinating delivery of the data to the Smithsonian. This technical process of integrating an instrument payload onto a commercial satellite required a tight partnership and enhanced communication with the major entities involved. That includes Ball for their technical knowledge of the instrument, NASA for mission direction and ultimately as the customer, as well as Intelsat as they played a dual role as both the commercial owner-operator of the satellite as well as provider of the ground systems. This partnership really was essential to guaranteeing that the nuances, details, and requirements for success were incorporated into the spacecraft design, starting at the earliest phases of the program, all the way through final spacecraft level testing, which finished only about 6 to 7 weeks ago. Putting this all together, bringing it all back, Maxar's support of the TEMPO mission highlights Maxar's strengths and ability to bridge commercial and government programs. TEMPO adds to our decades-long experience building and supporting missions that give insight into our rapidly changing world. We are excited for tomorrow's launch, as well as watching TEMPO's commissioning progress over the next few months and accumulate into publishing the data, which will be available for all. Thank you. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Joe.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. And last but certainly not least, we have Jean-Luc Froliger, Senior Vice President of Space Systems at Intelsat.
Thank you, Joe. Let me just tell you how excited we are at Intelsat to be working with NASA again. We actually have a proud history of working together. Back in the early 90s, if you remember, the Space Shuttle Endeavour helped rescue one of our satellites, Intelsat 603, which was stranded at low Earth orbit. And it sent it back to geostationary orbit, where it provided service for more than 20 years. So while this is not our first time working with NASA, it's certainly our first time hosting a payload for them. And we're excited about that opportunity and being able to contribute to science. So the TEMPO instrument, as was said, is hosted on Intelsat 40E. That satellite will soon join our fleet of 56 satellites we have operating at geostationary orbits. It will be positioned at 91 degrees west, a prime location over North America. Its primary commercial mission is connectivity for mobility services. What it means is providing internet services for commercial airline passengers, internet services for regional business jets, as well as for cruise passengers. Besides mobility services, Intelsat 40E will also assist with this disaster recovery effort. So as we said previously, we're launching Intelsat 40E on a Falcon 9 5500 launch vehicle from SpaceX. It's a two-stage reusable launch vehicle. And the launch will occur from Launch Pad 40 at the Cape. Liftoff is at 0030. The night between Thursday and Friday. We have a 2-hour launch window. We can launch anytime between 0030 and 2:30. We expect the satellite to separate about 30 minutes after liftoff, so about 1 a.m. local time. Soon after that, within the first 2 hours, the first major event will be the deployment of the solar arrays of the satellite, which are folded during liftoff. And then over the next couple of weeks, the Intelsat mission team from our Mission Control Center in Northern Virginia will be performing a series of maneuvers to raise the orbit to its final orbit, so geostationary orbit. So there'll be some perigee maneuvers and a few apogee maneuvers, and that will take about 3 weeks. Within 3 weeks, the satellite will arrive at 91 degrees west at the geostationary orbit. At that point, we'll perform a checkout of the commercial payload that will take us towards the end of May, and Intelsat will start commercial services at that time. We expect the TEMPO payloads to be turned on soon after that, and then together with NASA, we're proceeding with in-orbit checkout of the instrument. So very excited about this opportunity, and again, great cooperation with all the parties involved, NASA, Smithsonian, Ball Aerospace. Maxar has been a partner of Intelsat since the 1970s. So thank you for this opportunity. Back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jean-Luc. That concludes the briefing portion of the briefing. So we can go ahead and move on to the Q&A now. It appears that we already have a question in the queue from Stephen Clark at Spaceflight Now.
Hi, yeah, thanks for taking my question. If I could get one end, first of all, can someone address the total cost to NASA for the TEMPO mission? And then also, from a scientific perspective, what constituents in the atmosphere, what pollution constituents and chemicals are you able to actually detect with this instrument? And with that, are you able to identify the sources emitting the pollution? Thank you.
So it sounds like that might be a good two-parter, maybe one for Kevin and then one for Jean.
Sure. So this is Kevin. The total cost to NASA is approximately $210 million. Of that, just over $90 million was for the instrument development itself, and the remainder has been for both paying our contractors for the hosting of TEMPO and the integration, but as well as some support, engineering, and management that's been going on at NASA's Langley Research Center.
And then, Jean, do you want to take the second part of that question and talk a little bit about specifically what TEMPO will be looking at and whether it will be able to identify sources?
Yes. We're going to measure several EPA criteria pollutants, including nitrogen dioxide, ozone, sulfur dioxide, aerosols, formaldehyde. For some of these species, we will be able to detect the emission sources like nitrogen dioxide, which is often the product of fossil fuel combustions. Nitrogen dioxide will be one of the best constituents to detect emissions.
Okay, thank you, Jean. We now have a question in the queue from Jeff Faust at Space News.
Hi, good afternoon. For whoever wants to take this on, I know there was a lot of interest about a decade ago in hosted payloads on commercial geosatellites. We have not seen that many actual hosted payloads fly on such satellites. So I'm curious what lessons learned you've taken from TEMPO that might be able to enable more payloads in the future. Thanks.
Kevin, it sounds like this might be a good one for you too.
Yeah, that does sound like a good one for me. So there have not been as many as originally predicted. However, some of the things that we've learned from TEMPO are that learning how to work with our commercial partners and commercial practices, because recognizing that we are a hosted payload and not the primary payload. That plus one of the unique things that we did with TEMPO that we're looking at reproducing in the future is we developed the entire instrument first, not knowing exactly what we would be hosted on, but developing the instrument, understanding its specifications and its needs, and then we went out and solicited a host contract that was picked up ultimately with Maxar and Intelsat. So that process allowed us to come to the table with a fully completed, fully tested instrument, which has helped us to fit into the commercial timeline for spacecraft development that moves at a very rapid rate. So those are just two of the high-level items. We're actually here right now working on a lessons learned session to collect a whole host of lessons across the board on hosted payloads.
And this is Jean-Luc, and I can add to this from the commercial operator point of view. So we've done other hosted payload in the past, specifically for the FAA with the WAAS, Wide Area Augmentation Network, that helps navigate aircraft for landing and takeoff. But I would say the prime reason why there has not been more opportunity is the schedule risk. Right? For a commercial operator, schedule is extremely important. The satellite has to be built quickly. It has to be launched. It has to be on service as fast as possible. In the case of the TEMPO payload, we had the rare circumstances that the Tempo instrument was already built pretty much when we entered into contract with Maxar in early 2020. So that risk was retired. But I would say that's one of the main reasons why some of those hosted payload opportunities don't mature is schedule risk, right? And in this case, we didn't have the schedule risk, and it was a great win-win for all the parties involved.
This is Aaron Abel. Also thought I'd chime in a bit. The ability to mate a hosted payload with a commercial operation involves a myriad of details, and it's a kind of a perfect match from the ability of having the spacecraft have that excess capacity to having missions that are aligned enough that the orbital slots work together. And again, as Jean-Luc just mentioned, to having the correct schedule and timing to accommodate. So again, it's many factors that made Tempo work. It came together to make Tempo work, but also complicate the process.
Thanks so much to all of you for those answers. We have another question in the queue now from Ken Kramer at Space Up Close.
Hey, thank you for doing this and taking my question. Two things I'm wondering about is similar measurements. Are there NASA satellites that are making similar measurements to this already? And I'm wondering, how is this different and improved? And the other question, I want to follow up on what Stephen Clark asked, because it was a little hard to hear the answer. Can you send us a list of the pollutants that and constituents it's going to measure, and down to the ppms it'll be able to measure to? Thank you.
So this sounds to me like a question for either probably Karen, maybe Jean, about other NASA satellites making the same kinds of measurements.
I can take this question. This is Sean. So from the existing NASA satellites, so we have low Earth orbit LEO satellite instruments, like OMI, Ocean Monitoring Experiment, which is actually a Dutch Finnish satellite instrument on the NASA satellite Aura. And so from OMI, you can measure similar atmospheric constituents. But this is from the polar orbiting satellite. So you can only measure the pollution once per day at fixed time. For air pollution, you have a lot of variation from throughout the day. And if you only take the measurements at a fixed time, you could not capture a lot of the air pollution development. For me, we miss a lot of the morning rush hours, also the afternoon rush hour. We're not going to monitor the change of the rapid change of the air pollution. So for Tempo, because it's from GEO, so we will be able to sit over above the equator and look at the same region over and over. So we're able to provide hourly daytime air pollution at a very high spatial resolution, down to like 4 square miles. You have a second question. I think you mentioned you are asking about the list of air pollutants, right? Down to the sorry, I didn't hear you the last part of your question.
A list of the pollutants you can measure and down to the parts per million or whatever level you can measure down to. Thank you.
Okay. So, that's a very good question. It really depends on the specific pollutants. For ozone, yeah, we can measure down to the more like 10 ppb level. So that's our precision requirement. This is in the troposphere, and in the low troposphere, closer to the surface. For NO2, for the nitrogen dioxide, yeah, we can also measure down to the ppb level, parts per billion level. Similar for the formaldehyde and the sulfur dioxide. It's kind of similar, I think. So for the aerosols, we typically use different units like optical depth. I think we can measure the aerosols with a precision of on the order of 0.1 aerosol optical depth. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, if you could send out a list with all that information you just said and anything else would be great. And I'm sure Stephen and myself would be happy to get that. Thank you.
Ken,
Okay, sure.
we do have a brochure that includes, I think, a lot of that information you're looking for, but I believe Karen St. Germain wanted to respond to your question as well.
Yeah, this is Karen. I'll just go back to the first question. So that was right. We have several other missions that make observations of atmospheric constituents, atmospheric composition. Zhang mentioned one of the more important ones, which is OMI, the Ozone Monitoring Instrument. That's on the AURA spacecraft. But there are a variety of others. For example, the orbiting carbon observatories 2 and 3, the OPS-LIM instrument, and a variety of others. But the key point there is that they are all in low Earth orbit, so they all get one look per day or over any given point on Earth. So the real unique difference here with TEMPO is going to be that geostationary look. Actually, two things. The look from geostationary orbit, which allows us to observe about once an hour during the daylight hours. And then, of course, the spatial resolution, which is down to the neighborhood scale. Most of our other capabilities are closer to, I'm going to guess, about 100 square mile area, whereas with TEMPO we'll be down to more like a neighborhood scale. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question in the queue from Katrina Miller at Wired.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering if there are any backup launch windows planned in case of bad weather or technical difficulties on the morning of Friday.
Yeah, I can answer that. So it's a 2-hour launch window, and we can launch the next day or the day after. We have the same 2-hour launch window. It might shift by a minute or so, but we can launch any day of the week for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Okay, and I know we have another question from Justine Kalma at the Verge. She is maybe unable to get through on the system here, so I'm going to go ahead and ask this one for her. It's a two-part question. First, Kevin, I think this will be for you. Can you please confirm when the data from TEMPO is expected to be available?
Sure. So as was briefly mentioned earlier, the TEMPO instrument's going to power up at the very end of May, very beginning of June, and we're going to go through our commissioning phase where we're checking out all the systems on the instrument, and we are characterizing the instrument performance on orbit using some ground calibration validation mechanisms. After that, starting in about October timeframe, is when we'll begin turning around and producing our more routine science data products. So those will start coming out, increasing levels of complexity of the data products over the first 6 months. But the first data that'll be in near real time will start flowing out towards the beginning of October.
Thanks, Kevin. And there's a second question here from Justine. She wants to know if one of you can speak more, and this would probably be a question for Zhang. Can you speak more about how the data from Tempo will supplement or interact with data from air quality monitors on the ground?
Yeah, this is Sean. So I can try to add a little bit more to the first question, then answer the second question as well. So as Kevin mentioned that we can do the commissioning around starting from the at the end of Memorial Weekend. Then we're gonna have the first light of the science measurement around early August. I think we're going to probably release some images right after that. But we're going to start the nominal operations around early October, and we're going to put the data, send the data to the NASA's Atmospheric Science Data Center, SDC. But we still have to do quite some work to validate the data products, make sure that the quality of the data can meet the requirements. So we are not going to release the data to the public until a year after the launch. So that's next April. For the second questions, Tempo is a science mission. So one of our main job is to make sure that the quality of the data products can meet the requirements. But there's a separately funded Tempo early adopters program funded by NASA Applied Sciences. And so that program has already been established, trying to broaden and enhance Tempo applications with this special attention to public health and air quality. Some of the early adopters, including EPA and LOA, so they would like to use Tempo data and combine with the ground-based air quality monitoring, and combine with the air quality forecast models. So they'd like to integrate all the information together to improve the air quality forecast and to put the data into applications, putting it into use.
Okay, thank you, Zhang. I have another question here that was submitted by email. I'm going to go ahead and ask this. This is Greg Avery, who is a reporter at the Denver Business Journal. This is another two-part question. I think, Kevin, this one, both of these might be best for you. First, what's the design life of the Tempo instrument? And then of the $120 million in cost to NASA not associated with the instrument building itself, how much of that is to lease space on the satellite?
All right, I'll take those one part at a time. Firstly, the baseline mission for Tempo, once we've finished commissioning, is 20 months long. However, the instrument, as Dennis Nix mentioned, is built very similar to the Korean GEMS instrument. which has a much longer lifetime, and we benefited a lot from the design and the quality of the parts that were used to build the TEMPO instrument. So we fully expect TEMPO to continue operating pretty much as long as NASA funds it. And the host spacecraft that we're on is expected to be up there for 15 or more years. So that those two combined, we're expecting the baseline mission of 20 months to be continued to be extended as long as TEMPO is producing good data. And then Joe, can you repeat the second half of the question?
Yeah. So of the $120 million in cost to NASA, not associated with the instrument building itself, how much is payment to lease space on the satellite?
So it's a complex answer, but approximately $70 million of that is to put the instrument, to have the instrument integrated onto the spacecraft, to have the spacecraft designed to accommodate the TEMPO instrument, put the instrument on, do some special testing on the ground before launch, which has already been completed, and then some of that money pays for operational costs over the baseline 3 months of commissioning and 20 months of operations to have the Intelsat operators and the data pathway active for the TEMPO instrument.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. So we have another question in the queue now from Stephen Clark at Spaceflight Now.
Thanks for taking my question. I think this is probably for Kevin as well. Back when this instrument was selected in 2012, NASA said the launch was targeted for 2017, and this may follow up a little bit on Jeff Faust's question. But what caused that 5 or 6 year delay in the launch of getting this TEMPO instrument ready to go?
Sure, yeah, I can take that one. So originally when it was proposed, you mentioned the original launch date. During the course of the development of the instrument, the 5-year concentrated effort to develop and test the instrument, there was about an 8-month delay due to some technical difficulties and some requirements that were proved to be challenging to meet. But the biggest impact overall has been 2 different things. The first being TEMPO instrument was designed, built, and then without a host in mind, it went into storage for about 1.5 to 2 years, while at the same time we were releasing a few solicitations to try to get a host contract in place. So after a couple of no bid scenarios, we were lucky enough to partner with Maxar and Intelsat to host the instrument. So that did set us back a little bit while we waited for the ride to come around. And then, as has happened with a lot of companies, COVID has had a little bit of an impact in the overall spacecraft development timeline. So those things combined put us to where we are launching here in just a couple of days.
Thank you, Kevin. I am not seeing any more questions in the queue. So unless we see any other questions pop up here in the next few seconds, I'd like to thank everybody, all our panelists for joining us today, everyone who called in and asked such great questions. And I think we can go ahead and wrap this up. That concludes our briefing for today. And thank you again to everyone. We're looking forward to this launch. Go TEMPO.
Go TEMPO.
Go TEMPO. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Joe.